Bon matin à tout le monde. Bienvenue et merci d'avoir bravé les monstres d'aujourd'hui pour être là avec nous ce matin. En fait, je tiens aussi à souligner la présence de nos élus locaux qui sont, en fait, qu'on pourrait caractériser d'audacieux et d'engagés. Alors, merci d'être là ce matin. Si vous me permettez, je voudrais aussi souligner la présence de deux personnes qui sont des anciens collègues. En fait, il y a plus que deux personnes qui sont des anciens collègues de travail ici aujourd'hui, mais particulièrement Marie-Claude Laberge et Hélène Brown, qui ont été très actifs au niveau d'Ateliers Créatifs dans ses débuts et au niveau du chat des artistes aussi. Alors, bonjour à vous autres. Aujourd'hui, je vous dirais que ce qui est marquant, c'est que nous on réunit dans une même salle les personnes qui ont conscientisé les partenaires, les élus, la population générale, à l'importance du maintien des artistes dans les lieux qu'ils ont revitalisés, en fait, qu'ils ont servi à revitaliser, qui sont les lieux, les quartiers industriels comme celui du Myland ou dans le centre-sud. On parle donc des artistes et des citoyens. On remercie d'ailleurs le comité des citoyens du Myland qui a été très actif et qui est encore très actif dans le soutien à tout ce qui est l'engagement des citoyens de la communauté à créer un milieu de vie qui est intéressant, qui est mixte et qui permet aux artistes d'y rester et d'y vivre. Je voudrais aussi souligner les partenaires qui travaillent d'arrache-pied avec nous tous, en fait, avec tout le monde ici, Pied Carré et les artistes et les ateliers créatifs, pour comprendre les besoins des artistes et trouver des solutions qui sont durables dans le temps pour qu'on puisse régler, ou en tout cas peut-être pas régler à long terme, mais pouvoir quand même agir sur cette problématique qui est le déménagement des artistes à répétition. La démarche d'aujourd'hui s'inscrit donc dans l'ouverture et la volonté de se doter d'une vision commune. Ce qu'on souhaite aujourd'hui, c'est de profiter de la présence de David Panton pour vraiment porter notre regard sur des réussites d'ailleurs, puis de voir aussi qu'est-ce qui nous différencie, nous ici, quels sont nos besoins, comment on peut faire les choses autrement, peut-être même en prévention de ce qui a été vécu à Londres. Donc, la Corporation des Ateliers Créatifs que je représente comme membre du conseil d'administration est vraiment particulièrement fière de recevoir David Panton. Je parle en français parce qu'il a le goût de se pratiquer, il a le goût de pratiquer le français. Peut-être que je devrais prendre un peu moins l'accent québécois, mais voilà. C'est bon. Alors, Acme est un organisme sans but lucratif qui a pour mission celle de préserver et de développer des ateliers d'artistes, semblables à la mission, en fait, que Ateliers Créatifs s'est doté. Bien que notre organisation soit bien jeune comparativement à Acme, qui a 40 ans d'existence, malgré le jeune âge de David, ou même des 20 ans d'Artscape, on souhaite par l'ouverture, en fait, sur les expériences d'ailleurs, combiner à l'ouverture des points de vue différents de chacune des personnes dans la salle, pouvoir vraiment créer des conditions viables, des conditions abordables, évidemment, et durables pour arrêter la nomadicité. Je pense que c'est pas un mot, en tout cas. On fait cette journée, en fait, ces 3 journées, on les a fait en collaboration aussi, puis on tient à le souligner, en collaboration, puis avec le soutien de Culture Montréal, de la SHDM, de la Ville de Montréal, que Jean-Robert Choquet ici représente, Montréal Métropole culturelle, qui est représentée par Manuela Goya, qui va vous adresser la parole tout à l'heure, Ministère de la Culture et des Communications, la CEDEC Centre-Sud Plateau-Mont-Royal, qui est représentée ici par son directeur général Jacques Desjardins et par Marianne Marchand, et évidemment le Comité des citoyens du Myland, qui est représenté par plusieurs personnes, Noël Sanson, Isabelle Anguita et beaucoup d'autres personnes. Et évidemment, Pied Carré, et aussi la chaufferie Les Arts, qui n'est pas ici aujourd'hui, mais qui nous a accueillis dans les 3 derniers jours, en fait, chez eux. Ça a été aussi intéressant de voir un peu la diversité des expériences qui sont menées par les artistes eux-mêmes aussi pour accueillir les artistes et leurs ateliers.
Moi, j'aimerais ça revenir un peu en arrière puis vous parler de l'histoire de la naissance d'Ateliers Créatifs brièvement. Pour ceux qui ont assisté aux 2 derniers jours aux conférences, Gilles Renaud, le DG d'Ateliers Créatifs, a mentionné qu'Ateliers Créatifs était né d'une bataille, celle de la Groover. C'est une usine textile où j'avais mon atelier comme 300 autres artistes. En 2004, on a appris l'annonce de la vente et sa transformation prochaine en condo. On s'est alors mobilisé pour former la coalition Sauvons l'usine. On a contesté contre la vente et surtout la transformation de l'usine en condo. Puis pour ça, plus précisément, on a contesté contre le changement de zonage d'industriel léger à résidentiel. Et on a réussi ce bout-là. Mais on savait qu'après, c'était pas tout. C'est-à-dire que contester, c'est bien, mais il faut aussi proposer autre chose. L'usine était toujours à vendre, puis nos ateliers n'étaient pas sécurisés. Et c'est là que la CEDEC a joué un rôle très important en nous accompagnant. Un petit mot sur la mission de la CEDEC, ce n'est pas une mission de soutien culturel comme telle, c'est une mission de développement économique et de revitalisation. Mais la CEDEC a vu le potentiel qu'avait ce projet-là, bien sûr pour le développement économique du quartier, mais aussi pour sa revitalisation et pour le soutien que ça représentait pour le secteur culturel montréalais au complet. La CEDEC nous a permis de passer d'un projet de contestation à un projet de développement d'affaires. Elle nous a aidés à structurer nos rencontres de CA, à écrire un plan d'affaires et à faire des démarches politiques. C'est des démarches très ardues qui ont duré plus de 2 ans. Malheureusement, au bout de ces 2 années-là, le propriétaire de la Grover a choisi de vendre à un privé. Mais de ça est né quand même des grandes choses. D'abord, ça a aidé à positionner l'enjeu des ateliers d'artistes à Montréal. Ça a renforcé la conviction de la CEDEC que la culture est un secteur économique fort pour les quartiers centraux, ce qui a permis d'ouvrir mon poste, entre autres. Et ça a donné naissance à Ateliers Créatifs, ben oui. Qui porte aussi aujourd'hui le potentiel de soutenir beaucoup d'emplois dans le domaine culturel. Aujourd'hui, avec les 2 projets d'Ateliers Créatifs, le Chat des artistes et le Couturoscope, on peut dire que Ateliers Créatifs soutient quelques centaines d'emplois, puis bientôt, ça va être beaucoup plus. En fait, ça porte surtout un grand potentiel pour Montréal. Et là, tout ça pour insister en fait sur le fait que soutenir la culture et les artistes, c'est pas seulement soutenir la création directement, mais ça peut être aussi soutenir des projets de développement d'affaires, comme le fait la CEDEC. Ça peut être de soutenir et de développer de l'espace de création, d'être un outil immobilier comme les Ateliers Créatifs, et ça peut être aussi de soutenir et porter des enjeux politiques comme le fait si bien Pied Carré et Culture Montréal. Culture Montréal qui est d'ailleurs un des partenaires de premier ordre de Sauvons l'usine, la Grover, la CEDEC et bien sûr Ateliers Créatifs. Et sur ça, je vais passer la parole à Anne-Marie Jean, directrice de Culture Montréal. Merci.
J'étais très contente que pour une fois, on va parler en public d'ateliers d'artistes sans qu'on soit en situation de crise. On n'est pas en conférence de presse pour ameuter les gens, on est là pour parler de la façon de créer des conditions favorables à la création pour les artistes. Marianne et Louise l'ont évoqué tout à l'heure. En fait, on s'est connus, nous, justement, j'arrivais, moi, à Culture Montréal. On s'est connus dans le cadre de la crise de la Grover et depuis ce temps-là, on travaille ensemble à trouver des solutions. C'était déjà documenté, cet enjeu-là avait été documenté par des chercheurs dans le cadre et même avant les consultations qui ont mené à la politique culturelle de Montréal en 2005. Déjà, Daniel Herbourg et associés avaient identifié dans une étude que cet enjeu-là se situait beaucoup, les artistes, on le sait, favorisent leur installation dans des immeubles à vocation manufacturière. Quand ils s'y installent, ils contribuent à la revitalisation d'un quartier, à la gentrification parfois, en fait, bien involontairement, et sont donc chassés de leur lieu de création. Les ateliers sont situés, évidemment, parce que ce sont des immeubles de cette vocation-là, sont situés dans des arrondissements selon 3 axes, en fait. L'axe de la rue Saint-Laurent, du canal La Chine et de la voie ferroviaire du CP. Donc, ça touche à plusieurs arrondissements. En fait, on en identifiait 8 dans les études, le Plateau, Ville-Marie, Rosemont, Petite-Patrie, le Sud-Ouest, Côte-des-Neiges, Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, Villeray-Saint-Michel, Parc Extension, Mercier, Hochelaga-Maisonneuve et Annecy, Cartierville.
Très heureuse de me retrouver ici aussi. Certainement, je n'ai pas été impliquée depuis très longtemps dans cette problématique qui va devenir certainement une solution et non plus une problématique. Mais je voyais de temps en temps dans les journaux, bien entendu, les artistes, les crises que vous avez traversées. Et au moment où on a pris au comité de pilotage la problématique en tant que telle, on voulait justement ne plus agir en temps de crise, avoir des solutions pérennes, voir venir les coûts et avoir une stratégie, une vision et des engagements tels que le comité de pilotage, parce que je rappelle certainement, vous êtes au courant, nous avons la chance d'avoir à Montréal dans le secteur de la culture un comité de pilotage formé par les 3 paliers de gouvernement, les gens d'affaires, les gens de culture. D'ailleurs, Culture Montréal était à la fondation même de ce mouvement, pour avoir une vision commune dans un objectif sur 10 ans, de faire de Montréal une métropole culturelle dans toutes les composantes que ça peut comporter, donc autant les bibliothèques, un quartier des spectacles, les quartiers culturels et bien entendu les ateliers d'artistes. Et j'arrive avec les ateliers d'artistes parce que la problématique des ateliers d'artistes est finalement une opportunité, un cas de figure pour le comité de pilotage qui prend tout son sens dans la convergence des initiatives, la cohésion des engagements et la coordination des actions pour trouver des solutions viables et efficaces. Les tendances que j'ai observées depuis un certain temps à Montréal nous demandent d'être plus innovants et plus ouverts parce que tels que les ateliers d'artistes, les projets que nous voyons émerger du milieu de la culture, parce qu'on est là, sont des projets qui nous demandent à penser au-delà des structures. Ce sont des projets qui sont transversaux, qui nous demandent d'être ouverts et trouver des solutions à l'intérieur de nos propres administrations, bien entendu, mais en collaboration. Et à ce sujet, à cet égard, les ateliers d'artistes sont pratiquement pour moi comme une sorte d'intégrale, de formules mathématiques avec plusieurs intégrales, plusieurs variables, parce que non seulement c'est complexe dans la collaboration entre les différents acteurs, mais c'est complexe aussi dans les mesures qu'on va mettre en place là-dessus. Et le comité de pilotage, le comité de suivi de Montréal Métropole Culturelle et le groupe de travail sur les ateliers d'artistes a tenu compte de tous ces facteurs pour j'espère avoir des solutions très prochainement, des solutions très viables pour Montréal. Dans ce cas, pour les ateliers d'artistes, l'objectif que nous visons, donc des solutions, est aussi important que le chemin parcouru. Et là-dessus, je dois vraiment lever mon chapeau et saluer le travail pratiquement de moine, la patience du jardinier que vous tous, vous avez eu, que ce soit le milieu, Louise, que ce soit les CEDEC, le milieu qui s'est mobilisé, Culture Montréal qui vient et qui ramasse dans un cadre très important, fondamental, les grandes tendances, les élus qui sont très importants dans tout ce maillage élus, administration, milieu, et élus non seulement sur place, mais aussi au gouvernement du Québec, même Patrimoine canadien qui, cela dit en passant, était partenaire de Chat des artistes. Donc tout ce monde-là devait se concerter, j'aime pas beaucoup le mot parce qu'il est utilisé à tort et à travers, mais une vraie cohésion des engagements et de solutions et coordination des actions devait être faite. Ce sont des mots comme ça, mais je pense que dans ce cas précis, on avait besoin vraiment de cette coordination pour arriver à comprendre de façon égale pour tous les paliers et tous les intérêts, à comprendre la problématique et avoir des solutions. Je répète, c'est pour bientôt, parce que bientôt, comme disait Anne-Marie, oui, il va y avoir un événement Montréal Métropole Culturelle. Et je disais tout à l'heure à M. Fernandez, le plan d'action Montréal Métropole Culturelle, c'est un plan sur 10 ans. Ça fait un peu stalinien sur les bords, mais on a besoin de 10 ans pour avoir une vraie vision, avoir des réalisations. Cependant, pour pouvoir s'arrêter un peu, se souvenir du chemin parcouru, parce que parfois on oublie et on prend pour acquis. Donc, il y a 5 ans, on a commencé à travailler tous ensemble, mais pour justement se permettre ce temps de bilan. Le 26 novembre, certainement vous êtes déjà participants, vous vous êtes inscrits, sinon faites-le ce matin même. Donc le 26 novembre à la TOU, Montréal Métropole Culturelle va se réunir à nouveau et on va avoir le temps de faire le bilan et aussi d'envoyer pour les 5 ans à venir, selon 3 axes, Montréal local, Montréal global et Montréal avec les nouveaux moyens de financement, ce plan d'action jusqu'en 2017. Donc, certainement, on aura à se parler aussi lors de cet événement. Je l'espère vivement. Nous avons tous les moyens de croire que les ateliers d'artistes, peut-être ça va devenir un fer de lance du développement, non seulement culturel, mais également des quartiers culturels et même du rayonnement international de Montréal, parce que certainement, on va avoir des recettes qui vont être copiées par tous, je l'espère. Dans ce cas des ateliers d'artistes, pour moi, personnellement, ça a été un peu comme la formule de Khalil Gibran, vague et nébuleux et le commencement de toute chose, mais pas leur fin. Oui, c'était vague et nébuleux pour moi il y a certains temps, mais la fin, certainement, va être très probante et on va avoir la marque de Montréal de collaboration, de convergence et de coordination. Et là-dessus, une autre personne qui laisse la marque à Montréal, c'est quelqu'un d'audacieux apparemment. Et comme mon père disait, audaces fortuna juvat, la chance sourit aux audacieux. Monsieur Fernandez.
Tant que j'entendais parler de concertation et de cohésion, je me disais, oui, mais à la fin, ça prend quand même quelqu'un pour tenir le gun sur la tempe, sur la tempe des promoteurs. Et c'est le rôle que nous avons eu. Je vous ai fait perdre un peu de temps dans le trafic ce matin, je ne vous en ferai pas perdre plus en vous parlant longuement. Mais juste pour vous dire que j'ai étudié avec un gars à Paris, il s'appelle Calon. Il disait, les grands projets sont les projets qui changent. C'est les projets qui se feront influencer par des personnes intelligentes le long de leur parcours. Et puis, nous, on s'inscrit tout à fait dans ça. C'est-à-dire que le travail que Mme Marchand, Mme Jean, Mme Goyan ont évoqué, Mme Oder aussi ont évoqué, ce long processus pour arriver à quelque chose où les gens se passent le relais de la main à la main. Et là, je vois Pierre Présignac aussi, qui a été un acteur absolument essentiel dans le processus aussi. Donc, se passer le relais de la main à la main, puis la vision ne se perd pas, puis à la fin, il y a quelqu'un qui sort le gun, poum, puis le met sur la tempe, puis ça marche. Alors, bientôt, on va tous se réjouir ensemble d'un Myland qui va dépasser Londres bientôt. Hein? Et puis, on part plus tard, on va s'inspirer d'eux, on va les dépasser. Alors, je passe la parole au suivant.
Pendant que Marianne Marchand commençait à prendre conscience des difficultés à l'Agroveux en 2004-2005, on était en train de rédiger une politique culturelle à la ville. Et avec les consultations qu'on a faites, tout ça, il était clair qu'on devait accorder une priorité aux ateliers d'artistes. Et au cours des années, comme après avoir travaillé sur cette politique-là, on s'est mis à la mettre en œuvre. On la relit régulièrement pour se dire, bon, OK, ça va, ça avance. Puis la section atelier d'artistes, il manquait un petit peu dans la colonne réalisation. Là, on avançait moins vite. On s'était dit clairement que pour faire ce type de développement-là, ce n'est pas des initiatives de fonctionnaires, c'est d'abord et avant tout des initiatives de la société civile. On a étudié beaucoup le cas de Toronto avec Artscape. Les pouvoirs publics étaient très près, mais Artscape est quand même un organisme qui est issu du milieu et non pas de l'administration publique. Et on était convaincus que c'était la même chose qui devait se passer à Montréal. Tantôt, en écoutant les collègues, sur la page couverture du petit document qu'on a reçu, je me suis mis à regarder les logos en bas et ça m'a rappelé l'image de l'allégorie qu'on utilisait et qu'on utilise encore beaucoup dans le cas des ateliers d'artistes. Ce dont on a besoin avant tout, c'est d'un coffre à outils. Ce n'est pas d'un outil en particulier. Dans certains cas, un problème peut être important, mais se définir de façon assez simple avec une solution assez simple. Dans le cas des ateliers d'artistes, c'est un problème c'est un enjeu qui est déjà complexe. Et quand on commence à regarder c'est quoi la solution, on ne peut pas le définir par un marteau, un tournevis, une paire de pinces. On a besoin de toute une série d'outils. Et en regardant les logos, je me suis rendu compte que dans le fond, le coffre à outils, il est imprimé devant vous. C'est l'ensemble de ces organismes, de ces institutions-là. Et ce n'est pas un hasard si tout le monde est en appui à l'événement d'aujourd'hui, parce que dans la plupart des cas, ce sont des organismes qui ont été essentiels à différents moments dans le développement de ce dossier-là. Ça a commencé bien avant 2004-2005, ça a commencé avec la création des CEDEC, dont on ne savait pas à l'époque que, moi je me souviens que c'était employabilité, économie sociale, etc. On ne pensait pas au secteur culturel, on y pensait peu en tout cas. Et dans les années 2000, plusieurs CEDEC, celle du plateau, mais celle du sud-ouest aussi, et plusieurs autres, ont pris conscience à quel point on ne pouvait pas avoir une politique de développement local sans que les créateurs de tous ordres, les artistes, les artisans, les techniciens, le monde de la culture en général en fassent partie. Et après ça, il est arrivé un certain nombre de cas précis qui se sont manifestés. Culture Montréal est arrivé en 2002 par la suite. Autre élément essentiel, ça prenait un élément catalyseur du côté de la société civile, culturelle, pour des enjeux de ce type-là, qui n'étaient pas des enjeux strictement du genre on veut plus d'argent au CALC ou au CAM ou au CAC, etc., mais pour travailler sur des enjeux locaux, des enjeux territoriaux. Par la suite, ça a pris une politique culturelle, ça a pris aussi l'implication des pouvoirs publics, et il a fallu attendre ce jeu d'essais et erreurs avant que naisse Ateliers Créatifs. On cherchait ce que serait notre handicap montréalais. On ne pouvait pas tirer sa fleur pour qu'elle pousse plus vite. Il fallait attendre qu'il se passe un certain nombre de choses. Le cas de la Grover est arrivé. Et quand je vois le logo de la SHDM, à l'époque, ça s'appelait la Société de développement de Montréal, et la directrice générale de la SDM était autour de la table quand on travaillait sur le rachat de la Grover. On avait besoin que l'institution municipale, par son bras immobilier, travaille là-dessus. Après ça, pour le dire poliment, la SHDM a pris un petit congé de quelques années. Elle est revenue depuis 2 ans à son rôle initial et juste à temps, effectivement, pour faire partie de la solution dans le cadre de ces nouveaux projets-là. Effectivement, on a fait énormément de chemin au cours des dernières années. Ce chemin-là, personne ne peut s'en attribuer la responsabilité seule. C'est vraiment un travail d'équipe. Et c'est vraiment l'image du coffre à outils, pour moi, cette image-là est toujours très forte et elle va l'être aussi dans l'avenir, puisque même si on atteint certains objectifs au cours des prochaines semaines, même si des annonces importantes se font, ce chemin-là va continuer à s'ouvrir devant nous et on va devoir continuer à avancer. Dans un contexte, je dirais, de succès. S'il y a des difficultés immobilière pour les artistes, c'est parce que la Ville de Montréal ne va pas si mal au plan immobilier. C'est parce qu'il y a de la spéculation. C'est rare qu'il y ait de la spéculation dans une ville en perdition. Donc, il faut travailler dans un contexte où le succès de certains ne devient pas l'échec des autres. Il faut trouver des solutions où tout le monde est gagnant et c'est pour ça qu'on a besoin d'autant d'outils. Ces outils-là, excusez l'image un peu froide, mais cet outil est représenté par des personnes bien vivantes, dont beaucoup sont dans cette salle. Et c'est avec toutes ces personnes-là qu'on va continuer d'avancer. Et je l'espère bien, au cours des prochaines semaines, pouvoir amorcer et annoncer des vrais progrès réels au profit de la communauté créative de Montréal. Merci beaucoup. Bonne journée.
David is the executive director. He's the founder of Acme in London.
Only 2 years ago, I actually found out that Montreal has got a Mile End. I have lived in Mile End in London for 44 years, and my journey here is from one Mile End to the other. Mile End district in London originally is the poor Jewish quarter, industrial, and where immigrants come and come again and come again and come again. And it was the immigration, if you like, of artists on their way through, and we had some responsibility in making sure they stayed there. Anyway, I'm here really for you to use me as a kind of tool, as an example. I'm here for discussion. It is not just a story about artists and studios in London. It is much more to do with the whole evolution of the way in which society grows, the way in which the city grows, the way in which the relationships of people, of politics, of finance, of property, all interact and all ineluctably move on in the direction. So really we're talking about the belief, the central belief, which is why we're here. Can you hear me okay? Is that all right? Okay. Which is that artists, studios, artists working communities not just have a kind of cultural significance, but actually have really important economic benefits, and they have important social benefits for the wider society and for business. In other words, culture and artists and the studios where artists make their work is not just something to be regarded on the fringe of society, on the fringe of activities, but it is actually a waste. It's a waste of a resource, it is a waste of people, and artists... Still on? Yep. Artists should be integrated into society. So in a little moment, I want to take you through, in a sense, the London story. It is an evolutionary story, and every city, every country evolves in different ways. Everywhere is unique. Each has its own set of attitudes, pressures, beliefs, the kind of push-pull between those various different parts of society are just different everywhere you go. So what we're going to talk about now is looking at the way in which artist studios have grown in London. And really it's a story that starts no earlier for us than the 1960s and takes us up to today. And something we should sort of think about as I'm trying to unfold this story is the whole sort of notion of evolution, which is that if nothing's broken, don't try and fix it. If things are okay at the moment, there's no need to change. The reason why you have to adapt and change is because of external pressures. And artists and artist studios fall into exactly that same kind of category. So artists in London, in the same fashion as many artists elsewhere, the first real sort of demographic, sociological growth of artists is definitely post-war. And for us in London, primarily the first use of property on this kind of scale was because English artists were wanting to paint bigger. They wanted to be American abstract expressionists. They wanted to find space to adapt and to operate on a much, much larger scale than ever really had happened before in London and in the UK. And at the same time as this pressure was coming, we have the situation in London where the docks, docklands, the whole kind of centre of commerce moves downriver by about 30 or 40 miles, leaving beside millions and millions and millions of square feet of empty warehousing, dockland stuff. Montreal is a very similar city to London, Liverpool, and so on. You will follow this story. So we have industrial decline. Artists are the first, if you like, immigrations into these kinds of property. We couldn't afford even cheap studios such as were being made available in the docks and in the warehouses. And for us, and for a lot of artists, continuing to be an artist from art college was a matter of literal survival. And of course, in London, we actually had a divided city, an extremely divided city, that the west of London and the centre of London still remained after the war as a vibrant, commercial, physically nearly 100% city, whereas in East London, you know, even back in 1971, 1972, we still had bomb sites. We still had spaces that looked like that up and down the city. Because the money was not just available after the war, even into the 60s, to be able to set straight an awful lot of the city. Consequently, this is the kind of place that we as artists began to discover and began to occupy. And we started, Acme started, as a kind of a legitimate process of bringing together a number of effectively unofficial squatting groups of artists dotted about in all places in East London. We decided to create a small organisation that could talk to the city government, talk in the terms of saying, well, we're not going to pay you any money, but at least we will occupy it officially as opposed to unofficially. And so our history starts as a kind of housing movement, housing and studio combined. And if you can imagine, and I still can see these pictures vividly in my mind, imagine Mile End, here, your Mile End, when 80–90% of the property is actually standing empty. Difficult, isn't it? That's what chunks of East London and the Mile End district in East London look like. So let's gallop through the decades. Let's look at what artists are doing and have done, and this story is repeated around the UK, Glasgow, Liverpool. It's repeated around virtually every urban city in the Western world, where artists take the initiative, artists choose to create the kind of space to work through their own energy, through their own initiative, and in a situation where the supply and the demand ratio is one where actually there is an abundance of redundant cheap buildings, and there is a big demand, then the situation is relatively easy. It's what happens when you run out of property, or it's what happens when other people get their eyes on those particular kinds of property, that things begin to start to happen. So, for example, and I'll need to come back to this building at a later point, because politically it has the significance. If you look at yesterday I was able to touch the screen. Now I hope I can point in the right direction. The building at the top used to be the Yardley's perfume factory. It's in East London in Stratford. Actually, it was demolished to make way for the Olympics. That is Zaha Hadid's swimming at the Aquatic Centre in the Olympics. That's what developed us out of existence with this particular building, was the Olympics. But either way, this was the biggest studio building in Europe. By this time, we had 500,000 square feet in one building, at the sum of something like 50 pennies per square foot, £0.50 a square foot we were paying on this building. But either way, our initiatives, other artists' initiatives in London and elsewhere, are essentially vulnerable and subject to all kinds of pressures. And if we're going to try and move, which we are in a little while, from the sort of the story to the kind of analysis and the kind of general position that we find ourselves in, the kind of classic position that artists, cities, developers have been in, certainly in London up until relatively recently, is one where artists are the vulnerable part of the equation. Artists have gone somewhere, artists have discovered somewhere, artists have created a kind of interesting, vibrant community. But these things sort of don't stay on their own. Other people are interested, and not just developers, but it is also a partnership largely with the city processes as well, that the classic situation is that the attraction of other development, other commerce is too great to consider the position of artists. So we, like many others, essentially are a kind of cultural nomad. The bags are packed, you go and find somewhere else in the city, hopefully, where the pressures are not so great. So that was a kind of global picture, if you like. I'd like now to really talk to you a bit about our own particular story within this. This is a row of houses in Mile End. Now, each one of them, I would imagine, would be selling in the order of £2.5, possibly even £3 million a piece. And you're looking at East London. This is not Chelsea or Knightsbridge, and it's not where even the Russians now are buying up all the property. We're still in East London. When we took over this row of houses, A, they were empty, and B, if you had said, would you like to buy one, people would have said, well, why? I mean, we are in the 70s here. We're actually in a political climate that hadn't changed. The 70s was a very egalitarian and a very social welfare period in our time. Excuse the next two pictures, but this is also where we come from. So we went to college in West London and became, in a sense, professional artists in East London. So yes, there really was the swinging 60s in London, and that's probably not me, but it could have been me, wandering down somewhere like that. So that's Carnaby Street. Slightly younger than now. That's our very first property. It was a bookmaker's. It was a betting shop once upon a time that had become derelict, and was the very, very first property that we negotiated with the London Council, the local government for London, along with quite a few others, obviously, but this was our very first one. And Jonathan and me were at art college together. We knew each other since we were 18, and we then carried on in one form or another in business ever since. And this is now headquarters in Mile End. It used to be a leather factory. It made gloves and coats and garments in leather, and is a building that originally we had been renting, but had subsequently were able to buy, and we'll go through the mechanics of that in a moment. So we are a housing association, actually, by constitution. We are a registered charity. We're non-profit, always have been, always will, and we are a recognised strategic organisation of the Arts Council of Great Britain. So the Arts Council is essentially the cultural wing of the government, and they have a number of organisations, whether it be to do with opera or music or theatre or dance or literature or whatever. As far as the workspace sector for visual arts are concerned, we are the, if you like, the designated consultant for the Arts Council on that. We're not funded by the Arts Council, but we do have a kind of symbolic support, which is very, very important, and it cuts both ways. And really, what Acme is and what Acme does and what we hope we will continue to do is very simple. We concentrate on the bricks and mortar. We concentrate on property. We pledge to provide the cheapest legal studio space in town. And it's not just cheapness in terms of its rent levels, but we are also pledged to create the best possible environment, the most accessible environment, but obviously for artists who are in genuine economic need. This is a charity, and we're not in business to support other kinds of cultural activity. However important and good they are, our job is to help artists who are struggling to find the money to put together for their studio space. Affordable non-residential studios, this is what we're talking about. That's our principal activity, is building, converting all manner of edifices to make available ateliers and workspace for artists. We also are involved, and it's very crucial that we are, in working, living space. We use the word live, work, live, rather than live, work, because after all, this is the point of the kind of spaces that we're trying to use. It is essential, and it's for artists who can't even afford to live somewhere else and travel to a cheap studio. Alongside this, we are now in a position to be able to offer some residencies, some awards. We can help some artists with additional finance to be able to work and pay for, to be able to pay for working in their studios. And we also operate an international residencies program. This is now 25 years old. We work with a number of international governments and organizations from Switzerland, Australia, and also 2 in Canada. And Francine is my colleague over there. And we work with Calc, and we, for the last 3 years, we have been hosting Quebecois artists in London, and long may that continue. Besides the active programs, besides the activity of property, we also are involved a great deal in working with other organizations, with other governments, with other commercial developers to sort of seek out new initiatives. We're also involved very much working with artists, individual artists and other studio groups. What we endeavor to do is act, in many cases, as kind of mentors and consultants to a lot of artists and artist studio groups who may even just be sort of starting from the very beginning. We're there to provide some kind of help and some kind of strength. So this, right this minute, in terms of scale, we have 14 large buildings and quite a few other smaller buildings, and we're operating about 500 studios at the moment in London. The important part of what we do, of course, is the demand. We have a waiting list, best part of 1,000, and this is an active waiting list. It's not just a list of names, but it is a list that is there shouting, saying, where's my studio, where's my studio? So that we have got the kind of demand side of the equation to be able to talk to government, to be able to talk to developers and say, if we do something, it's full. It's full from day one. And in terms of rents and talking with Ateliers Créatifs over these last 2 or 3 days, I think we're talking in roughly the same kind of language here, because it's not just what can an artist afford, it's also how much lower is that affordable rent than what would be regarded as a kind of benchmark market rent, open market rent in the city. So if we take that figure of an average of about £9.40 a square foot, which I think pretty much the same as Ateliers Créatifs, we regard this and we operate this as an inclusive rent. So within that figure that an artist is going to pay, that's all the finance, all the rent, the insurance of the property, all the other costs, all rolled up into one inclusive rent. In London, on the open market at the moment, if you were an artist and you walked into a realtor, an estate agent, a commercial agent and said, can I have a space somewhere? They would be quoting you a figure of something like £24 a square foot. And that would be an exclusive rent. You would additionally have to pay council tax, business rates, insurance, etc., on top. That would probably take you to about £30 a square. Excuse me, about £30 a square foot. So we are 2 times, is it 2 times? 3 times cheaper than the open market. So that is the kind of pressure, that is the kind of challenge, that is what you're having to deal with if you're finding and being able to operate space for artists. And when there was a ready supply of empty factory space, we're talking then in London about being able to afford that kind of space. But all that really has gone. There's no empty properties left in London anymore. We're not standing still right this minute, and I've had to be on the phone over these last 24 hours. We're building on 3 sites in London at the moment. We're building in South London, and we're building in 2 more areas a little further east in East London. And so by 2014, we will be looking at providing space for upwards of 700 artists at the moment. And I think I've just sort of pulled out those figures for you again. It's about 1/3 of the open market. We also have a number of other properties. We've got one which is the fire station, which is now somewhere where we are using as work-live units, and these are even more subsidized, if you like, than the main studios. Our residencies and our awards program, we don't just operate this in isolation. We work very much in partnership with other organizations, particularly with art colleges and local governments and other galleries. We use this as part of, if you like, the technique, part of the approach when we are doing a new development. For example, if we were going to, I don't know, let's suggest Newham in East London, we would be talking with the Newham local council, we would be talking with the art college in Newham and saying we would want to bring, from our part, bring into being an artist in residence scheme who would be part funded by the borough, part funded by the college, and part funded by us in the form of a free studio, for this person actually to become a kind of active interface between all the various parties and partners in that part of London. And I was just saying a minute ago, as far as our international residencies program, it involves hosting at any moment something like 20 different artists in London from about 8 different countries. And right this minute, I think you recognize the lady on the top right. she's your Minister for Culture. The person on the left is your Agent Général for the Quebec office in London, Pierre Boulanger. And I think that is Christian Canel, who I was hoping to see today, but sadly he's with his daughters because it's Halloween, or nearly. And he was the first Quebecois artist that we had the pleasure of hosting in London. And this, he also had, we provided him with an exhibition at our project space. And below that is me again. That's Françoise Dion and somebody else from the Canada Council from the Arts. So we've just started a relationship with the Canada Council. And that's where the calc artist is, in Bow, darkest Bow they call it. And in the same building, that's where at the moment Craig Leonard is the artist, and he is also in the company of 2 Swiss artists, and there's an Australian artist is there as well. Just to round off the picture as far as who we are and what we do, we ran a gallery in Covent Garden in London for many, many years. It used to be a banana warehouse, and it was in central London. And we started off paying a rent of 50 pennies a square foot for a banana warehouse in Covent Garden. When it was time for there to be a rent increase, it was increased to £20 a square foot. It was a time when the property market was going mad. Consequently, we moved back to East London again. But we use this space very much as a facility for our residencies, international and UK-based, to have a platform, to have a window, to create that kind of open face to London. And now really, I want to start our discussions about the mechanics of it. Where does the money come from? What kind of property is involved? Who makes the decisions? How are these things organized? And again, we're looking at this kind of evolutionary process of what worked in one decade or 1 year certainly has to be moved on. So we were effectively renting, like many other organizations, short life property, and this worked for hundreds and hundreds of artists in East London. Besides houses, again, you will recognize this instantly. We adapted virtually any building that was going. We've had a meat pie factory. We had a meat pie factory in Brixton, if anybody's ever heard of Brixton, and it actually had an abattoir at one end and a shop at the other. And they used to bring the cattle in and kill them, turn them into meat pies, and sell them. We have had some of our most important sculptors, Turner Prize winners, have had in their earlier days studios in a meat pie factory. So we've been through the adaptation, the recycling, the refurbishment and conversion of many dozens of properties like that. Again, we're back to Darwin, we're back to evolution. Things obviously operated for many years on that kind of plenty of supply of property, hence it was cheap. The UK and London went through 2 massive structural political changes. The first being in 1977-78, when Margaret Thatcher became the Prime Minister of the UK. And almost overnight, there was a kind of seismic change in societal attitude. We went, in a sense, from about 1977 through to about 1980, from being a kind of social identity, where there was a feeling that there was a society, where a lot of things were shared. It was an egalitarian, more or less, society that we lived in. Post-Thatcher, things became atomized. They became fractionalized. It was the individual was the important, not society anymore. She famously said, "There's no such thing as society." I mean, can you imagine? But the whole emphasis was on ownership, on private enterprise, on being your own developer, in a sense. Don't live in a council house anymore. Go and buy it, and buy your property. And everywhere suffered from that. So that was the first thing that happened, was in the 70s. And the second was when we get to about 1996, 7, 8, we went through the most massive property boom. It took a while from the shift from the Thatcher government to really sort of get this into being. But there was a point in London, around about 1996, 97, when it was like the Wild West. Virtually every regulatory element of the government process, zoning, things that should be kept, all completely sort of went out of the window in the face of a kind of greed almost, a developer. It was like a feeding frenzy. It was like watching, sharks circling, the helpless seal that's flopping about in the pool. That's what it felt like in London. You could become a millionaire overnight if you bought the right property. And that was what was happening. So we were in this position where you knew you were going to lose something unless you found very quickly a way out. Thank God. And this obviously doesn't translate exactly into Montreal's situation. I can only tell you what happened in London. Part of the Thatcherite political process was, let's have a lottery. Let's have people pay for our culture, pay for our sport, pay for doing all these kinds of things. So, and it's still right this minute, about 50 million people every week do the lottery. So private people stick £1, stick £2, stick £3 in the little lottery office, and that has become the money that has financed an awful lot of the cultural activity of the UK. Government gave up spending on that a long time ago, pretty much. It's now the public seem to be doing it. Anyway, we were successful, and we were able to find the money alongside some other interventions and alongside borrowing from our bank. We were able to buy that white building you saw, which is still our headquarters, and also that fire station building, which is where we operate our residences. And really, that was day one of becoming, in a sense, a proper property developer. Because the very next thing that we did was, in discussions with our bank, suddenly, you are serious. You're not just operating on a temporary basis anymore. You actually have equity. You actually have permanency. You actually have some kind of power. That leverage takes you into the next phase. So we borrowed, without any lottery or any other intervention, we borrowed about £1.5 million in order to develop this building. And how we did it was essentially to cross-subsidize it by building a group of ateliers, living and working spaces that we sold. And we sold them on the open market, and we used that money and ploughed it back into the development overall, so that the end result comes back to a proper, affordable workspace for artists. So we used the lottery money to become permanent. That provided us with the leverage. It means you can sit at the table. We're not begging at that table. We're in business. And then we were again successful with lottery money, but this time it was not necessary for the business plan. Every project henceforth is feasible without any other intervention whatsoever, but we were able to get some lottery money to accelerate the process because of the opportunities. The question is, can I just say a little bit more about the lottery? So, okay, every one of you do the lottery. The rest of Montreal does the lottery. The whole of Canada does the lottery. That produces a pool of money every week, never mind every year. So individuals are financing the lottery. In London, it's actually a debate whether Richard Branson from Virgin owns the lottery system or another organisation called Camelot. is private. It's private enterprise. Consequently, some of the money goes into somebody's pocket. The rest of it goes to a number of agencies who control where it goes. This is about 60% of the pot. This is profit over here. Somebody's making money out of it. And what we have here are agencies as far as sport is concerned, heritage and buildings, and everything that goes to supporting the restoration and the maintenance of some of the sort of major historical buildings in the UK. And one branch is dealt with through the Arts Council for culture. So there's a big pot of money, and that then obviously is going to places, for example, the Royal Opera House, or it might go to the theatres, or it might go in a number of directions. Thank God, at the time when we were in desperate need of some money, there actually was a point where the Arts Council were really focusing on the infrastructural side of the visual arts for a change. Oh, can I make a digression? Which is to tell you what the sort of the British psyche is as far as artists and art are concerned. I would think probably for 1,000 years, if you had to mention the word culture to the Joe in the street in Britain, they might say Shakespeare, or they might say Charles Dickens, or they might talk about the theatre, or they might talk sometimes about music. Unless someone was Italian, German, or dead, they would not be talking about visual art at all. The notion that there were living artists working and what they produced was something you appreciated, something was a kind of a complete sort of non-area. So we have been the poor, the country cousin. The visual arts, we would regard the UK up until about 20 years ago as being largely visually illiterate. So part of the whole journey has been also one of a mindset shift in the population at large about attitudes to artists, attitudes to modern art. It's modern because it's live, as opposed to dead art. I'm probably lost the thread now. We're talking about the lottery, and yes, that's where it came from. It came out of people's individual pockets, channeled through the Arts Council, and especially for infrastructural purposes. Yes, was from the using lottery money in discussions, in application to the Arts Council. So obviously the Arts Council suddenly had a bonanza. Instead of having the kind of normal amount of government intervention, suddenly they have been given through the lottery process a kind of once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do major projects with. The government used it also as an excuse to reduce the other money that the Arts Council got because they could see that the lottery will pay for it. And in a truly Thatcherite mentality, you'd have no government money at all. You just have the lottery paying for the whole of the UK's infrastructure. But I digress. Now I want to talk about, I think, possibly somewhere close to where we're talking about the situation in Montreal. I don't propose for a moment that I know the detail of what's happening in your city. But what I'm going to try and do is take you through some of the kind of the processes involved that we've been involved in as direct piece of business working with other developers. The most important thing that happened, if you like, to draw back from the kind of excesses of the kind of society that we were in through the property boom, was actually the government, national government, local government process, looking more carefully at what the planning process should be as far as urban industrial space was concerned. And our word for this is reprovision. And if I had to think of a single thing that happened as far as Acme and Artists in London is concerned to help the process, has been that particular policy of reprovision on brownfield sites. Are you happy with that explanation? Yeah? Okay. So, in the normal course of things, the developer, in this case it was Barratt Homes, multi-billion organization. They're the largest house builder in the UK. They build God knows how many houses. Normal process, they would be applying to build a housing complex. They would be intending to build the majority of them to sell on the open market. They would, because of the planning game process as far as housing is concerned, they would have to deliver a percentage of affordable social housing. So along they go. There's a place in Southwark, which had an old former print workshop, a print factory on it. So they just applied to do 100% housing development on this site. But Southwark were almost the very first local government to say no. We don't want to lose either jobs that exist on that site, or we don't want to lose the potential of jobs that exist on that site. In other words, we want you to re-provide economic working space because we say so. The belief is that if you start losing things, you will never get them back again. If everything goes to housing, that's it. Now, that is a hit as far as a developer is concerned, because the most lucrative part of any development process is the high-end residential space. Never mind. So what Barratt suddenly discovered was they could no longer just assume that they could carry on the way they were. And they had to find a user for a considerable percentage and deliver that as economic space. In a situation in Southwark, and I don't know if anybody here has ever been to Southwark. Okay, it's where all the knives and guns are right this minute. London's quite a violent city. There is a lot of knife crime, there's gun crime. I suppose it was on your TV a year ago about our riots. Did the riots? That's frightening stuff. Southwark's the epicenter in South London of a pretty dodgy part of the world. But Barratt obviously are fairly crazy, except that property prices are going up so much. They decided to do this development in Southwark. And they know that for a price they can sell houses. But what they know they can't do is just build economic space, build light industrial space with any prospect whatsoever of finding another kind of printer or another business organization to do that. Consequently, they had to fall back on discussions that we had had with them earlier in a different part of London, and they could see that what Acme could deliver at a price would be certainty. There would be a known outcome. If jobs equates to artist studio activity, then that particular box is ticked, and we have got the possibility of seeing artists working in new studios. So the first thing that happened was this attitude to industrial space and reprovision. That's just the first. How did they make their decision as to the percentages on that particular site? Okay. As a housing development, Southwark wanted to see something like they wanted to see 40% originally delivered as houses, social houses, okay? So that was the original premise. The local government knew that in terms of reprovision, there would have to be a sacrifice somewhere. So we ended up with our studios being 25% of the whole thing, and there being a reduction to 15% on the development overall. But what the government said was, I want to see, if I don't see the exact square footage re-provided, I want to see the number of jobs, potential jobs exceeded on that site. And there had been about 40 men and women working in the print workshops, and we provided 50 studios. And certainly in European structural funding terms, an artist studio is worth 1.5 jobs. You can put that in any application to do with artist studios in the Western world, in Europe that is, and we would regard the job generation of a space as being something like 1.5 jobs. So does that answer your question? Yeah, thank you. Okay. Oh, the deal. Let's look at the deal. So Barratt was, in a sense, could see that they had to strike a bargain. Because obviously to operate sustainably artist studios, there's no point in trying to do any development at all unless what happens at the end, what's the outcome? There's got to be a viable space at an affordable rent. You then have to capitalize that back to a development cost. So this journey, capitalization, rentalization, is the sort of permanent thing that one's working with artist studios. Either way, the capital value of doing a development to end up with affordable studios, in this particular context, came out about half the construction cost. That's not half the total development cost, because there's land, there's fees, there's all the other negotiations and so on. Literally, when they built the bloody thing, what did it cost them? They had to take a hit of about £1 million to get Acme into the building. So there's £1 million it's cost them just to get planning. Doesn't sound very attractive, does it? It sounds like, who were you talking about? A gun at someone's head? I think Acme might have been putting a gun at someone's head at this point. That's how it felt. We thought we were in a shotgun wedding. Forget about art, forget about culture for a moment. Just ignore that. The deal is that artists represent jobs. It ticks the development, the economic development box. It is not the borough's cultural policies. It is to do with their economic side of things. So you can see how powerful this has become. Thankfully, after many, many years of losing all the regulations that there had been in the 50s, 60s, 70s, zoning, you shall do this, you shall not do that in certain parts, all that now is beginning gradually to be put back through this single attitude over brownfield sites. It's because we're now only looking at new development being the kind of major activity. As I said before, all the old buildings have gone. They're all lofts now, either demolished or they're lofts. So we don't have any new dinosaurs to have a look at. So Barratt say, oh God, we need Acme. What do we do? Okay, I say, well, for a start, I'm only paying half price. Secondly, I need these studios built according to my specification, not yours. I want them built to my design, not yours. And I don't particularly want to pay for them now. I only want to pay for them when you build them. Okay, they say, shotgun. And by specification, it's not gold taps, it's not cosset carpets, it is basic space, but proper space with proper lights, a door that shuts, decorated, toilets, all the rest of it. And Barratt have to basically say, here you are, David, here are the keys to 50 studios. Now, please, can we have our money? Okay. We have actually paid them on some stages, but we don't need to go into the detail there. Essentially, we are buying the permanent space. We bought a 155-year lease from Barratt, just the same as anybody who was buying an apartment in there. We bought 50 of them. Where you have single definable developments, then the notion would be that of buying a freehold. Where you have got mixed things, within the same kind of development, essentially there is a freehold on the whole building, but people buy leasehold space within that. It will probably disappear as the process in the next few years because the UK is moving towards what is the Australian way of doing things, which is to buy things common hold, i.e. you buy your lease and you buy a piece of the freehold as well. But 155 years lease is just about far enough away for me not to have to worry about at the moment. But I really don't want to sort of give that to the next person. But where you have that kind of, you will be able to transfer that into a freehold with a small sum of additional finance at some point in the future that will be quite capable of going permanent. Yep. Okay. How long ago? We cut that deal in 2003 to 4, something like that. And I'll leave it at that for now. So Barratt now get their permission, because obviously once Barratt have a deal with Acme, we're not on different sides anymore. We're on the same side. Developer and artist are on the same side. They have got a mutual reason to get a good development out of this. So we go in partnership to the government, to the local authority, and we say, we want to get planning permission for this scheme. It's a revised scheme. It has got known outcomes. You know what you're going to get. You're not developing something that's got a question mark, but you know that you will get this particular scheme. So the next thing that's in favor of artist studios development in this process is certainty. In other words, the planners, the government knows what's going to happen. There's no empty space. And if you've got empty space in Southwark, it'll get set fire to. That's what happens to empty space. So 100% occupancy from day one is crucial, which is the relationship between artist studios, or shall we say more generally, economic space and housing space, yeah? My experience in many developments that have this kind of position is that the local community, the local residential community have previously had many jobs in the places that have been lost. They would much rather see jobs come back to an area than it just to be going for houses to sell. Does that answer your question? Okay, the question is, how stable is an artist population? How long do they rent studios for? Could I please park that question and continue with the development side of things? But we come back, because we've got plenty of time, to start looking at the artist position and so on. I'd just like to follow or drive the argument about the process and the reasons why it works in London. So Barratt don't stand still. You know, the chairman of Barratt isn't going to be happy about losing £1 million to a bunch of artists and someone like me. So what do? They think, aha, we have got something we can make use of. We can actually market on the back of a certain artist studio community being in our development. In other words, if I'm going to try and sell an apartment over there in Knife City, I think we better try and make it as attractive as possible. And so this is actually this is a document from 2004. This is the marketing brochure that Barratt produced, and this was distributed to all potential buyers. And if I had 3 hands, I'd be able to do this a little bit more easily. But, yeah. No, it's fine. You probably can't. Can you see that? Here's the whole development. We've got 10 stories of apartments. There's 100 apartments there. That's the Acme Studios bit. If they were trying to sell these houses on their own, Barratt were looking at a figure of something like they were looking at a figure of something like £240,000 per apartment. That's the kind of going price, new development in southeast London at the time. The marketing strategy, and I should just sort of repeat what they say in here a minute. This document talks about the Galleria. It talks about creativity for living. It talks about, it talks about the art form lives. Light and space, an artist's dream. This is to buy an apartment. This is not us marketing studios. They talk about the place to be seen. Montparnasse has come to Southwark. And so on. In other words, they have got a new tool at their disposal. Now, I've put my pen down now. Here we go. There's a new thing that they're able to do, which is we've actually increased the value of their property. They sold every single one of those. Let's just talk about an average for a moment. They were able to uplift their apartment sales by at least 20k a property. And not only that, but instead of taking about a year and a half to sell them, they got rid of the whole shebang in about 2.5 months flat. £20,000 times 100 apartments makes £2 million. They spent $1 million, they made 2. So we made Barratt money. We made it for them. They recognize that. I've got some newspaper cuttings and I've got other material I'll leave for anybody who's interested. But basically, Barratt suddenly got it. They got that they could make money out of artists. And once you start that ball rolling, it's quite difficult to stop. Question is, what kind of specification? In other words, in the end, what kind of artist is going to occupy these spaces? We are talking about this kind of development being in a mix. So we have not got people who use gunpowder or are doing oxyacetylene welding, or there has to be a degree of compatibility. So we've got plenty of studios in other buildings where you can drive a truck through them and burn, all manner of things. But these ones have to be largely, not largely, they have to be compatible. And we run the gamut of virtually every element of the visual arts would be party to being able to get an Acme studio. So we have potters, we have craftspeople, we have jewelers, we have sculptors, painters, digital, video, you name it, they're in there somewhere. Reprovision, certainty, these are largely what the politics want. As far as the developer wants, we have got this is the thing that makes it work for the developer, is apart from having to do something, is wanting to do something. I will get a better product if I do it this particular way. And we opened the building in 2006, and when we had a Labour government, and when Gordon Brown was the Prime Minister, David Lammy, who is the MP for Tottenham, was the Culture Minister at the time, and he came to open the building. And as you can see, it not only fulfills... hang on, I need to go another one. So this situation has come about without necessarily making a case for culture per se. This has been driven by artists being a category of workers. It's driven by artists being a functioning part of the, if you like, the commercial, the industrial landscape. Yes, artists are producing cultural output. And of course, you know, these things are of immense value to the neighborhood, to the society as well. But this has not been driven by an attitude that we're trying to support culture. It's actually a much more basic, you know, economic and commercial deal. The next thing that happened, as far as we're concerned, was the telephone started ringing. The next thing that happened was various developers in various parts of East and South East London suddenly are saying, David, can I have a talk to you about artist studios? And this is weird. I mean, I have spent 35 years saying, can I talk to you about studios, and being told to piss off. Here we now, almost at a stroke, have the development process, and it isn't literally just developers, but it's actually the politics, it's actually finance, and the development process as well, suddenly thinking positive things about artists' workspace. Again, it's not the cultural thing so much as what the economic effect might be and what the social benefit might be. And we then have traveled through a number of other developments as well, which I'll just quickly touch on. But if that was what sort of, that's how the penny dropped as far as some developers were concerned, the next thing that happened was a rather more, shall we say, in looking at the effects of artists in workspace communities and what other benefits do they bring apart from cultural ones. And we and a couple of university departments, and there has been there's been a considerable amount of research done in the last 5 years, effectively into what is the public benefit that artists bring to a neighborhood, to the bigger society. Looking at artists in terms not just of what they do inside the studio, but looking at how artists interact with the neighborhood, with the community, with schools, with all kinds of outreach and other programs. In other words, it's the network that operates between artists and all the other people. It's the force for the good. You know, in a sense, artists are good people. I'd rather have them in the building. I'd rather be stuck on a desert island. Maybe not. But artists act in a kind of effective social glue. So we've worked here with Swan Housing. The deal's exactly the same. Re-provision comes first. Excellent question. It actually is it's a two-way process. Because really what happens at street level is the most important thing of all, is what does a neighborhood actually feel when it's disappearing? You know, once you've lost it, it's gone. And so I think my experience in talking to politicians and governments, local government in London, is that the need, the pressure, actually comes from the local situation. It's about time this thing stopped in my neighborhood. That's where it starts. That then is discussed. That then becomes accumulated in terms of, well, actually, things aren't too clever in my borough either. Actually, in my city, we're not enjoying this process. And so this will go up the food chain to the kind of political decisions that are made. But ultimately, I think that they don't come down as law. They have come down as a kind of a position, and what local government has done has made their own brave, courageous decisions to say, we have the power to make this particular policy work for us. In just the same way as the government process will be looking at my housing requirements, my education requirements, transport, infrastructure, health, etc., etc. We're now looking at maintaining, preserving, nurturing, growing the fact that this neighborhood was a vibrant workspace as well as a place to live. So all one's doing is that kind of social engineering that's going on. So I think actually the power is vested locally. Each time the developer is using the fact that artists are going into this new development to become the way in which they talk about their development when they're trying to sell apartments. Ditto. Here's an example of the human element. In East London, the senior planner that we were working with in Hackney decided to go to West London. Now, we've never been in West London before. We've tried and it's hopeless. But the senior planner, the human being, went to take up the job of chief planner in Brent, is the council. It's near Heathrow Airport. And the very first thing he did was pick the phone up to me and say, David, I don't think my borough is going to work unless we have some artists in it. We need artists. Could you help? And this is now the chief planner talking to Acme. Yes, of course. You realize the kind of financial consequences of what you're talking about. And by the way, not many artists know West London, so it's got to be cheaper than East London, even though West London is more expensive than East. I'm not going to West London unless you make it worth my while. So here we have an example of political brokering. By he, because I know him, but borough planners say to any developer, we have a core policy of needing to incorporate a percentage of affordable cultural workspace into any development that is brought forward, whether you like it or not. So reluctantly, a developer called Catalyst suddenly discovered when they went to talk to Brent planners, by the way, you're going to have to talk to Acme, who funnily enough are in East London, about doing a deal. And I'll cut the long story short, but it's the same story as the previous one. And again, the developer realizes they've got to make the best of it and use it as the process to market. Now we come to the big one. All the others were medium-sized developments. We've now just finished this June gone, this particular development. We're in the London borough of Hackney, okay? And Hackney is a very big borough in geographical and population terms. It was the major inner East London borough for light industry. It's also the borough where the majority of the Olympics have just taken place. It is a borough of extremes. The riots in Hackney were the worst riots out of any part of the whole of London. But there are also places where there is, very valuable property. It has a massive mixture in population in it. Anyway, this particular building here was about a 250,000 square feet, something like that. Has anybody ever had a Matchbox toy, a dinky toy, a car, those little cars? This is where they were made. And Matchbox were the biggest employers in the whole of Hackney. They employed tens of thousands of people in this factory and other associated activities. So you can imagine the economic effect to the borough when something like Matchbox goes. And if you are the politicians in the planet, the last thing you want to see is a housing development. You would hope that someone possibly comes along and says, I want to start working again. Anyway, the phone rang in something like February 2007. It was the chief executive of Telford Homes. Telford is just as big now as Barratt, multi-billion money. And he says, David, hello, can we talk about studios? There we go. So again, the long and the short of it is you can see what's coming, can't you? We actually did a deal in 6 days. Every single bit of the deal we did in 6 days flat. Over the moon. Thank you, David. Thank you, John. The deal of the century. Not because I'm pushing Acme Studios, I'm not pushing artists, I'm having the attraction coming to us. And we're talking about here, we're doing 49 big studios. The housing development in total, we're looking at something like 260. The most important part of what we have done that is the extension of the previous model is commercial partnering. There's obviously a lot of housing on the site. They need to sell a lot of houses. There's affordable social housing on the site. The re-provision requirement was for about 60,000 square foot of light industrial space has to be re-provided on the space in the development. We come to it saying we think we actually don't want all of that. We will take something like 40,000 square feet, which leaves the developer still with a percentage of commercial space to market. So we're already enhancing the housing sale process. The next thing is, how on earth does Telford market industrial space in an area where there is no industry anymore? They have to be attracting from other parts. The notion that in a year or two from now, there will be 100% certainty of fully occupied working artist community means you actually have a kind of hook. You have got something to attract commercial businesses, other enterprises to come to this development as well, which is exactly what's happening. So we've not only helped them sell houses, we've helped them market commercial space, office space as well. And by the way, we didn't get a leasehold here either, but we've got 999 years, which is not bad. So we're buying at a premium to have 999 years certainty. So we then control for the next millennia the rent of an artist studio. I hope. So we're looking, and Hackney by this time have got a very, very strong cultural policy anyway. But so we're ticking as many boxes as you can find on housing strategy, on commercial strategy, cultural strategy, social politics, the whole lot. You won't be able to read that, but I can prove it. I can tell you that in their marketing strategy, they're talking about the fact that if you buy a flat in this building, you'll be next to an artist community, workspace community, that will be providing the raison d'etre, providing the creative buzz. All the things you wanted will be being delivered by artists. My God, what a prospect. So that's Telford thinking about things. Here we go again. We are now in East London again, down in Stratford. This is the south side of the Olympic Park. In order for Genesis developer to get the planning permission for that monstrosity, that skyscraper, they had to find a use and the financing for the refurbishment of an Art Deco 20s Grade 1 listed building, and that's the bit that we're going to have. But the deal still is exactly the same. We've got two things going on, sort of even Stevens. One is the developer knowing they need Acme to help them get planning permission, but the other is the proactive nature of the local government saying, we will help this situation. The taxation process, the policies that you should be applying to some housing, some infrastructure and so on, we will move all that money and help you discount the cost of the studio provision. We have, in the planning process, which is universal in the UK, the part of the Planning Act, which is actually Section 106, is the legal framework for a planner to say, I want X, Y, Z. And it doesn't have to be necessarily in that order or in that kind of percentage, but it's how it is enshrined, if you come across this. So the government says to the developer, okay, we'll help. We'll let you have all your Section 10 requirements through into the affordable workspace for artists. We'll skip that one. And just another final example of what we're doing right this minute. This is not with a housing developer. this is with a student accommodation developer. London has become massive importer of students from all over the world, from Korea, from China, from Africa, from South America, America itself, and I'm probably leaving lots of others out at the moment, but London has become huge in terms of delivering education to, which means there's money in it, which means developers are starting building a student accommodation as a device to make more money. So we're working with a developer, partnering with 4 art colleges in London to create an environment with undergraduate student accommodation and also artist studios. And just finally, this is the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, I think he's called. This is the current 2012 cultural policy, cultural strategy for London. It refers to the fact that we need artist workspace communities embedded into our developments, and thank the Mayor, but we're actually mentioned as the partner by name. In other words, we do what the Mayor wants as well. Where have artists got to in this? It was a bit of a shame, really, because it was quite nice being mad and bad and dangerous to know. But actually, artists, the attitude towards artists has changed. The attitude not just culturally, but I'm explaining, I think, economically and socially, things have moved in a very different direction. So artists are important. They're not actually only important, they seem to me to be crucial. So once upon a time, they were planned out. Artists can disappear because we're busy doing developments like this. Actually, you're missing a trick. You're missing several tricks. You're missing the biggest trick, which is you can make money out of them and have a better city, a better society. So artists have suddenly become cultural key workers, just like the fire brigade, just like all sorts of other parts of society. And I think I'll stop there for 5 minutes. But what I would like to do is then sort of row back through a couple of the principles involved, but this is really by way of topping and tailing analysis. That's the London story. I'll just have a drink of water. Again, these things evolve as the pressures and other attitudes change. Acme started essentially as a cooperative, and in a period when the supply of property was plentiful and therefore cheap, even if it was temporary. There were no particular other external reasons why we would move from that. But gradually, as the situation became more and more under threat, we, in a sense, as a group, decided that we could no longer properly present to the outside world, the suspicious world, the cynical world of developers in the government, of just being a small artist cooperative. We had to have some kind of management structure, we had to have an executive, we had to have a way, in a sense being more akin to the development process that occurs in the other parts. So over the years we have evolved into the structure that we have now. Still non-profit, still with exactly the same motive, methods and mission, but we now have a board of management which is not, in a sense, a fully representative one from all the artists involved, although we have artists on our board. So we have an executive, staff and a board. And what artists in our studios want is for Acme to do the best job they can. I would rather have a studio than not have a studio. And it almost has been that kind of either or, because the old way, I think, would have seen the disappearance of artist studios almost totally, without being able to challenge in a way that people recognize the development and the political processes that are going on.
Because it was a process, there was maybe a better alignment of the needs and of services delivered the way they were defined, because it was built through the years and not set in place at a single moment.
I mean, I don't want to sound pompous or pious, but there's no point in doing this unless it is satisfying or trying to satisfy all the needs of the artistic community that come to us. So they dictate, but not necessarily by voting in a committee. They dictate through their work, they dictate through their activity, through renting a studio, through occupying a studio, through the business of being artists. They tell us what to build, how to build it, and for how much we should be renting it for. And that is the kind of driver of how we go about our business. So I say, yes, we're non-profit. We have to do that. Being a member of the national portfolio of the Arts Council, we have very carefully to have the governance that is approved, and we are also inspected very carefully by all the various boroughs and local governments that we're involved in. So we are extremely public in what we do. But we're not public in the way of there being 500 artists all having to be in the same room to make a decision about whether to repaint the staircase or not. They may tell us, and they may tell us in very strong terms sometimes, but it is not part of the voting or the formal decision-making process. Do you want me to explain a bit more about the kind of extent and breadth of the artist community in London?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. I need to do some more scribbling. Okay. Just as a matter of interest, if you had to pick a figure, what would you say was the population number of artists in Montreal? What's the figure that ends up in the newspapers or ends up on the TV if they're talking about artists? 1,000, 100, 5,000, 3,000? Okay. The figure that usually gets spoken about in London at the moment is 10,000, of which probably 7.5 are in East London. These things are a bit rough and ready, but that's the kind of current population. And in London, there are a number of studio groups, studio organisations, and we would count ourselves amongst them. Yes and no. The majority of artists in London might belong to much, much smaller artist studio groups that may have one or maybe possibly two buildings in which that community has been carrying on for some while. There are three bigger organisations. There's one called Space, and Space actually predate Acme. They were formed in 1968. They were the ones who were the first ones that went into Docklands. Artists like Bridget Riley, Peter Sedgley, these now are world-famous artists, but they were the ones who were looking for the big industrial space. And Acme, and one more in West London and South West London, which is called APT. Now, Space and APT, in terms of the big artist studio organisations, these would be more truly categorised as artistic, cultural foundations. The reason being is that they concentrate the majority of their efforts on growing programs, growing initiatives with teaching, with artists working in all kinds of different manners, and the studios are actually the kind of active place for other programs to exist. So I would put Acme not in that category. We are, to put it crudely, we're a property developer. We're a landlord, but we're a non-profit property developer, and we're a non-profit landlord. But nevertheless, what we do is concentrate on the hard outcomes. And many, many, many other artists and other studio groups and so on that we work with
conjoin with, and so on, concentrate much more on what you would call, oh God, I can't even write now, the soft outcomes. In other words, those organizations concentrate much more on what artists do than on what artists need to inhabit. But obviously, there's no point in being involved in hard outcomes without soft outcomes being the reason for doing it. So in London, we have got a number of studio organizations. We federate in terms of the 4 big organizations. We've got a kind of a working majority, if you like, called Capital Studios. We've been doing that for about 10 years. We also, for the last 8 or 9 years, decided that the important thing in London and the UK was for artists to stand up and be counted properly, not just anecdotal evidence, but let's put some strength to the studio movement. So we now have in being a federation, the National Federation of Artist Studio Providers, of which we're on the board. I suppose we ought to be. And there are a number, this is UK-wide, Bristol, Cardiff, Newcastle, etc. There's about 220 artist studio organisations that belong to the National Federation. And the Federation's job is primarily to show strength in numbers. It's to be there as a lobby group and a pressure group. There also is in being in the UK, but it is in a pretty small and not a very good shape. There is an artists' union. Artists formed unions all over the place back in the 60s. It was the thing to do. I think we sort of were participating in union activities back in our student days. But that does not really have any effective pressure at all. The real pressure is through the property management companies. So the question is everything all fine and dandy, or does the shit hit the fan occasionally? And how do we get out of that? Artists, when they're in buildings, think they're great. What if they got to leave? For many, many years, and this is probably in the middle 80s to the late 80s, one of the important places that we were inhabiting for studio space was where the new motorway, motorway okay? Was being brought in from east of the country into central London. And the whole planning process takes years and years and years and years and years, public consultation, etc. But there were about 150 houses and some other buildings that were compulsorily purchased for the advent of a motorway. And during this period, we had about 100 houses. Each of those houses had about 2 artists in it. So we had a population of something like 200 to 300 artists, all waiting for a motorway not to happen. Acme obviously had been negotiating. This is government property. This is the Department of Transport. And the only reason why we got these houses in the first place is because we promised, when the time comes, that they'll go back. No question. When the time did have to, did arrive, when the properties were going to be handed back, some artists, the vast majority of artists understand the particular deal that they had entered into. A handful did not. But as far as Acme is concerned, if at any point in our history we had ever not done what we said we were going to do, I don't think we'd be standing here today. And actually artists understand that. They understand that the situation for those particular properties was a temporary one. And don't forget, we're in business to provide more property according to the demand. So the majority of those ones, we were able to rehouse, put into a studio somewhere else. Yes, there were problems. Yes, there were 1 or 2 who decided it was a political thing to stay put. And we had to spend money, unfortunately, on eviction processes. But the huge majority of the other artists were on, when I say we're on Acme's side, I mean, what I really mean is we're on the same side. but there are times when, you have to move on.
So, thank you so much, David, for all this contribution. It's the third day, the third conference we're having. I'm Gilles Renaud, directeur général de Ateliers Créatifs. And Ateliers Créatifs could manage with a lot of help to organize these 3 days. And I think it's very inspiring, though I will do it in French, maybe, from after thanking you. You'll be able to practice then. OK. Ateliers Créatifs, en fait, on a un peu la même mission, comme on disait un peu plus tôt, que Acme a eu. Je veux souligner d'abord le contexte à Londres, évidemment, immobilier, politique, financier est très différent, et en plus fluctue dans le temps, comme on a ici aussi, on n'est pas stable non plus. Par contre, ce qu'on voit, c'est qu'il y a une vision derrière ça, il y a un processus qui n'est pas la seule façon d'approcher. On parle toujours de l'exode des artistes et comment tout ça se passe suite à la spéculation, conversion en condo. Il y a beaucoup d'approches. Celle d'Acme en est une qui ressemble à celle que souhaite développer Ateliers Créatifs, qui a déjà quelques réalisations derrière. Donc, pour nous, c'est vraiment une inspiration. On ne peut pas faire du copier-coller, mais ça nous rassure, en fait, dans le travail qu'on est en train de faire, en sachant qu'il y a place pour autre type d'intervention. Mais celle-là a sa place, et elle est significative, elle est rassembleuse également. Et on l'a vu, je pense, dans les discours qu'on a eus au début, avec les gens qui sont impliqués. On a eu des gens du ministère, de la ville, de l'arrondissement, etc., de différents organismes. On voit qu'il y a un intérêt en ce moment. Il y a un momentum. Je peux dire qu'il y a un changement de paradigme dans le sens, au lieu d'être en réaction à des situations difficiles ou à des crises, comme on en connaît tous, qu'il y a eu à Montréal, il y a un changement en ce moment qui va plus vers, je dirais, une planification, une stratégie, une analyse. Et ce qui est rassurant dans ça, c'est de regrouper différents intervenants. Il n'y a pas de petits gestes et de grands gestes, c'est l'ensemble de ça qui fait que c'est possible. On parle de la réglementation, d'incitatifs fiscaux, de reconnaissance d'organismes. Il y a toutes sortes de façons. Le financement, évidemment, mais le financement n'est pas la seule clé. Elle va être efficace, ça va fonctionner autant qu'on en a d'autres. Et ce que David et l'expérience d'Acme viennent nous montrer, il y a une bonne et une moins bonne nouvelle. La moins bonne, c'est que ça a pris 40 ans pour faire ça. La bonne, c'est qu'on ne commence pas à zéro. On a au moins la moitié du chemin de fait, je crois, à cause justement de l'attitude et de la participation des différents partenaires, autant au niveau local, municipal, provincial, fédéral, et les organismes également. Fait que c'était juste le commentaire, je voulais dire. C'est un peu comme si on fermait une parenthèse avec la visite de David. On a d'autres visites cet après-midi. Demain, il y a une visite avec Pied Carré dans le Myland, justement, que David va pouvoir faire, rencontrer les gens. Mais pour moi, c'est comme si on fermait une parenthèse avec la visite de David, qui est une parenthèse dans une phrase. Il nous reste le paragraphe, le chapitre et le livre encore à faire. Et on espère peut-être dans 2 ou 3 ans réinviter David, puis on aura fait un chemin, nous aussi, puis on sera en chemin vers quelque chose, puis ça sera encore encourageant. Enfin, je veux remercier encore tous les gens qui ont aidé à la mise en place de ces conférences-là. Je voudrais souligner aussi les gens du Rialto, l'équipe du Rialto qui a aujourd'hui, qui est un magnifique lieu, M. Carosielli, qui a voulu nous recevoir, et on sait que c'est un endroit ici où ils sont très impliqués dans le milieu. C'est un bel exemple de lien entre les organismes, le milieu, la culture, des partenaires. C'est une belle illustration et on veut le remercier pour ça. Et finalement, je vous remercie. Ouais. Puis finalement, je veux vous remercier de votre participation. Ça démontre, c'est un signe aussi très encourageant. Il y a des gens d'un peu tous les milieux et c'est ça qui parle beaucoup pour nous. On va vouloir faire un suivi. Il y aura évidemment sur le site de Ateliers Créatifs la présentation, il y aura des éléments qui pourront être là. Je vous invite à communiquer aussi via notre site ou Facebook ou Twitter si vous avez des commentaires. On aimerait avoir un feedback, que ce soit le départ ou en fait une alimentation sur le chemin pour qu'on puisse continuer. Puis les commentaires, critiques, positives, négatives, interrogations, c'est tout ça qui fait qu'on peut avancer. Vous êtes les bienvenus à le faire. Puis on espère qu'on aura d'autres occasions par la suite. David, merci encore.
Et merci beaucoup, Gilles et tous les Ateliers Créatifs pour m'inviter et à vous pour le privilège de parler avec vous. Au revoir.